Okay, folks, we're back. We got word a short time ago that the senators will return at 10:30 a.m. to take the votes. And they'll, the way we understand it is they will go through each impeachment article and they will vote. And then we're going to know the outcome, presumably by about 11 o'clock.
I think it'll take longer to go through 16 articles 31 times with voting and then calling the jury. So
we'll certainly know pretty quickly whether or not any of these are going to be sustained or not. So I'm joined this morning by Bud Kennedy, Fort Worth Star-Telegram political columnist, and also Matt Yarbrough, who is a defense attorney, former federal prosecutor, and also you worked in the Attorney General's office under John Cornyn.
Special Counsel John Cornyn.
Yeah, so you know how that office could and should run. Bud, you're the political guy. What do we think?
I've said from the beginning I thought he would be restored to office because the Texas Senate is so conservative. The maps were drawn for it to be as conservative as it could possibly be for Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick. The one seat that often flipped, which was the Fort Worth District 12 seat, which has flipped from Democrat to Republican 4 times in the last 30 years, was redrawn to include Parker County and Palapinta for Senator Phil King. So that is no longer a flip seat. That seat flipped from Beverly Powell, Democrat, to Republican. It's a solid Republican Senate, and now this is just Republicans disagreeing with Republicans about what this verdict should be. I was surprised that they went ahead with a trial, but I saw people vote to go ahead with a trial that I thought would probably vote to, that would not uphold the articles, it would dismiss the articles of impeachment in the end. I still think that Paxton comes back, but I think it's a 1-vote margin. I thought, at least at the beginning of deliberations, I thought it was either 21-9 or 20-10 for removal. Of course, it needs 21 votes total for removal. Paxton and Tony Busby are trying to count to 10. And they need 10 to keep him in office. I thought that he would be back, and I still think that enough senators, their future, their ability to pass legislation, their ability to serve their district, it depends on Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick and his allies in the Senate. Lieutenant Governor Patrick has been a fair judge, but he and it's the people voting for Paxton are all his strongest allies, with the exception of Senator Birdwell. And so I think that people will see which side their bread's buttered on for the future in the Texas Senate, and probably say, well, let's let this go. It should never have come to the House to begin with. The House
sent the Senate?
To the Senate. The House sent this over to keep the Senate busy at the end of the session, to make up for all the legislation the Senate blocked. The House sent it over and said, let's just give them a hot potato to handle. And so
what a hot potato this has been.
What a tremendous hot potato. And so the Senate will say, let's just let law enforcement handle KenPaxton's future, and let's go back to worrying about conservative legislation, conservative decisions for the good of the people of Texas.
Matt?
I think Representative Leach made some really great points yesterday in closing about that very point. That basically he was saying, we're not here because of a speaker might have gone on a bender one night over at the House. We're here because KenPaxton's action brought us all into this room together. He chose this course of conduct. I thought it was very fascinating when he was talking about yesterday about how close he was with Paxton, and the last 4 years he couldn't get a hold of him. He wouldn't return his phone calls, and especially as this led up to when ultimately they had to call in Paxton's number 2 to come over to the House to answer questions about this settlement of this $3.3 million, that he wouldn't even return the phone call of his own good friend from the same county, from Collin County, and his mentor. So I thought that was fantastic that in the rebuttal piece of this, Leach really set up that this is not politically motivated whatsoever. That great line about, maybe it was the other representative who said that he had not consulted the Bushes the night before him coming in.
TLR and Karl Rove, and right.
I thought that was very good at inoculating that line of
Well, you said that
conspiracy theory.
this will end the Bush era in Texas, and I don't know how many senators,
That was what
even
Busby
on
said,
Paxton's
yeah.
side, agree with ending the Bush era in Texas.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's I am not a political person in terms of covering politics, so I cannot read the tea leaves on this one. And in my experience with regular juries, usually the longer the jury deliberates, it's not a good thing for the defendant. But I don't know. This is not a regular jury, and and then it also could just be that they had made up their minds last night and they decided we're going to all go. I have seen this before where they all decide we're going to go sleep on it and we're going to start bright and early in the morning. I mean, you've seen that.
Right.
I mean, you've seen all variations.
Well, I'll tell you, I have found whether I'm, been a federal prosecutor at trial or when I've been plaintiff in civil cases, and once I've sent that case back to the jury for them to go to deliberate, I found that the quicker the turnaround, the more likely it is as a prosecutor or plaintiff, I'm going to win that case. The longer it goes, that's a bad sign because they start having questions about the verdict form, or they start having questions about a piece of evidence. Can we see that document? When those questions start coming out, that's when you know you've got maybe a hung jury or an issue or a problem. Here, as Buzz said, they're all really in a room lobbying each other over this. It's not a traditional jury in that sense. So
They don't even all
I don't
have to
know
be in the
whether
same room at the same
quick
time.
result or quick response is a good thing or a bad thing.
Yeah,
Well,
I think.
I do think that it does work that way. The longer it went, the longer the Paxton vote of the senators had time to lobby and say, well, shouldn't you come on over with us? I mean, the longer they had to throw out ideas. As far as the money, of course, the reason we're here is because of the money, because KenPaxton asked the people of Texas to pick up the bill for his settlement. And that is something, if the Senate looks at that, they can say, we handled that in our budget committee, the House handled that in their budget committee. The way we control the Attorney General is that if he doesn't do what we want him to do, we don't give him any money. We don't budget his office at all. We contract out legal services and we give him a little room to sit in, and we don't even pay for a light bill or a cell phone.
It's very true. They've got the power of the purse.
They can exert the strongest budget discipline imaginable.
Absolutely. To me, the biggest takeaway from this week is I can't think of a trial, and again, this is an impeachment proceeding on acquittal or guilt by the Senate, where the three most important witnesses in the case are not present.
Oh my gosh.
So Paxton's not in the room, right?
Except for the first day and yesterday.
Right.
And his mistress is apparently there and then all of a sudden becomes mysteriously unavailable.
Right.
And then three, Nate Paul's talked about the entire time and he's not there. So I've never seen something like this.
And I would have liked to have heard from that contractor.
And I would put
absolutely.
in four.
They should have forced him to appear.
I would put in four Senator Donna Campbell, who Laura Olson worked for up until apparently during some of the time that this was going on. I'd like to know how much she knew, and of course you could say Senator Angela Paxton as well. But there was so much courtesy shown in not calling witnesses, or maybe they even to have them come in and take the fifth and leave.
Well, you
and
can't
open
really
those
put Nate Paul on the stand. He's under federal indictment. He's
under
not going to
federal
testify.
indictment, right?
Well, but you could force him to be there. Now, granted, that's one of the things I was interested about the unavailability of Laura Olson, is because I wonder if there were some discussions that she is under grand jury subpoena, and if she had testified before a federal grand jury, that she could not then, testify about the facts of the case.
Right.
And so that might be the reasons for her unavailability. But I don't understand why she was there to begin with, if that was all a charade just to have her there and sworn in.
And I wonder if she planned to come in and take the fifth and then sat there all day and her lawyer said go home. So.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, those are the kind of the unknowns. Maybe we'll have the answers to it. Maybe not. I don't know. It seems like it had some. That was the kind of the word on the street was this was a Fifth Amendment situation, but who knows?
But you know what? I mean, that's one of the great things in actual litigation is getting the opposing party or defendant to begin to take the Fifth Amendment in a deposition or on the witness stand. I think it was kind of a mistake. I would have had Nate Paul in the room and made him take the fifth over and over and over again.
Yeah, I just wanted to hear from the contractor. Okay, let's hear how, because it's a pretty key thing. This how did the renovations get paid for, right? And so that person, according to what we heard, dodged the subpoena, and we never heard from that person. I think they could have answered. How was this supposed to work?
Did we ever find out who was the person that Bangert called in the middle of the night with the mysterious sticky note?
No. You talking about on the foreclosure order? No.
Yeah.
I don't think he knows.
But there
who
was
it was.
someone who could help him.
Right, and that was
educate him.
Right, that was related to the getting the foreclosure opinion, and then they ultimately got Senator Brian Hughes to be the they called it, I guess, a straw requester, because only certain people have standing to ask for opinions like that. And then there was this whole question of whether or not they even really needed to do that, because I don't know, it was all very kind of esoteric at that point. So Jay, you want to bring up a live look in the Senate chamber so we can kind of see what's going on, and we can see. You can see
Some activity.
A little bit of activity. People starting to come in. A minute ago, we had a different view of it, and it looked like some of the senators had started to come in and sit down. But I guess we're going to see how this shakes out. Do you think that it had already been decided by the time because we saw senators start to leave around 6:30 yesterday. Had it already been decided by then?
I think one of the knowledgeable reporters on Twitter, although former reporter who now works for a public policy firm, posted, and I don't know where she got this, but she said if you know how you're going to vote, you are allowed to go home. So the senators who went home were the ones who'd made up their mind.
Right.
And the ones who stayed were ones that wanted to continue deliberating and reviewing evidence or lobbying their fellow senators. So we saw some trickle out. It's no surprise that some of the senators that left early, that they were some of the most hardline senators, like Bob Hall, and so he made up his mind, was ready to go home, and so they just kind of trickled out gradually. We were left mystified about what was going on. Lieutenant Governor Patrick, who's been generally pretty good about notifying us about things, just kind of let the night drift off, and suddenly at 9 p.m. the DPS came out and said the Capitol's closed. So
I know we were here and at just before 8 trying to decide, okay, do we go home? Do we come back? And ultimately I told you, Bud, just going home, and then I closed out the live stream at 8 o'clock, and just said it looks like they've stopped deliberating, and we'll see you in the morning, because it was kind of very unclear what was really happening.
Everybody was out. Senator Shortner was out walking around the Capitol with one of his office staff, and there were pictures of all these senators just wandering around, so you could tell they'd been turned loose. Apparently they'd already told everybody what was going on, how they planned to vote, and they were gone. And I think that they didn't vote last night simply because they know this is a time-consuming process.
And they would have been here really late.
They would have been here really late with a potential for motions afterward or more decisions, and so they wanted to just go ahead and sleep on it and then come back and vote this morning.
And so for folks that are joining our live stream or who've joined within the last few minutes, we have gotten word that the senators will be coming back and beginning the voting process. They will be voting on each of the 16 articles of impeachment. We think it'll be pretty similar to the way they did the motions at the beginning of the trial, where each senator enters their written vote, and then they poll them one by one, and they have to verbally say it out loud. I mean, that's going to be a pretty dramatic moment. No matter how it turns out, I mean, the drama of this will be something to see, I think, because we just haven't seen anything like this in
I'm
decades.
getting my verdict scorecard ready right here.
Me too.
And I think it's going to be interesting to see which articles either Paxton has more votes or less votes per that article, and I think it'll show which issues during the trial resonated the most with some of those hardline folks, where we saw at the beginning on the motions that the senators voted on, where it fluctuated from 6 but got as high as 10 on some of those articles.
And what we don't know, I don't think they'll have any kind of, not a scoreboard. I don't think they'll use the electronic message board in the chamber to keep up with the voting. I think people are going to be keeping it by hand, and then it'll be announced at the end of each vote. The House has a big yay and nay electronic board, but I think with the Senate it'll progress along and people will keep their own notes.
But realistically, Bud, how much blowback would there be for senators who vote in favor of removal?
I don't think there's blowback because it's still a long time until the March primary. The senators represent these huge districts. This is really one of the most powerful offices in the state of Texas and maybe in America. There are only 31 people who control everything that happens in the state of Texas and every bill that's passed. Their districts are much larger than congressional districts. Some of their districts sprawl from Gainesville into Muleshoe almost. They have districts that are bigger than states. They represent a tremendous amount of people, and the power center is really very small and very closely held. It is very difficult. It's much more difficult to defeat an incumbent senator than to defeat an incumbent member of the Texas House. House districts are much smaller and more local. The Senate is a great big district, and the senator has gone all over the district, for 2-4 longer years, going to catfish fries and youth club dinners and pee-wee football and getting to know everybody in all these towns from Texarkana to Beaumont. And it's just really hard for a mystery challenger to come in and defeat an incumbent. So I don't think there's much risk. I think the main blowback is in the Senate itself.
Can you get your bills heard? Can you?
Right.
Can you effectively still work? That's
right.
what you're saying.
We'll see. I don't think that Lieutenant Governor Patrick will continue to not take a side after the trial. I think then it comes back to did you vote with my allies or did you vote with the other side? And so it's will Patrick hear my bills? And then if you vote on the Paxton side, it's will the House hear my bills?
Right.
That's their main concern right now. It's not about KenPaxton at all. It's about their bills. Can they get their legislation passed? Will the Senate pass their bills? Dan Patrick holds the Senate in such an iron grip at all times, as closely held as any lieutenant governor in my memory. Tom Craddock was the same way in the House, but he holds that power very close. He doesn't let anything pass that he doesn't approve of. And we saw this.
And do we know where he stands?
Well, I mean, is there
any tea leaves on that?
Yeah, his consultant is also the consultant for 7 of the 8 senators who voted with KenPaxton to not have a trial. So they share the same political consultant. They share the same allies, the same, in some case millions, hundreds of thousands of dollars from Ferris Wilkes of Cisco, Tim Dunn of Midland. When you hear the phrase West Texas oil men, that's who they're talking about. Their donors are the same, their allies are the same, their consultants are the same. And so although Dan Patrick has done a really commendable job in this trial, I don't think there's any question which political side he's on. I think he probably is a little put out with KenPaxton and the operation of the Attorney General's office.
But this case is being watched around the country, and I can tell you, yesterday I was defending a case for a client talking to the Attorney General's office in Pennsylvania, and it was the first question they brought up to me was about the KenPaxton trial, what's going on down in Texas, because of the Attorney General's offices, of the 50 across the United States, this is one of the largest ones in the United States, 600 employees, just alone, the powers that the Attorney General has in the state of Texas and the amount of vast area it covers. And as you know, right now, Texas has 4 maybe cities that will be in the top 10 cities here very shortly. So, and more people moved to the Metroplex area during COVID than anywhere else in the United States. And so, the amount of Californians that have come into our state who brought a lot of their sort of red Republican a lot of folks from Orange County,
Right.
which is very red, have moved here, and have moved into Collin County, and have moved into Frisco and Prosper and places like that. But it's being watched by all the AG's offices around the country right now.
But it's all being watched. It's also being watched by conservatives across the country, because let's face it, impeachment. Even since the House passed this in May, impeachment talk is in fashion now. There's talk of impeaching the president. There was talk of putting the former president on trial. Everybody's talking about impeachments everywhere,
Right.
and all the other impeachments, but this one come down to my party against your party. This is such an awkward one where 60 Republicans voted along with 61 Democrats,
Which I still think was extraordinary.
which was extraordinary, to send these articles of impeachment. They were so upset at the practices in the Attorney General's office, they voted to send these articles of impeachment to the Senate. But across the country, this is seen as a Trump thumbs up or Trump thumbs down. How is Texas going to go? Is Texas going to turn blue or stay red? Are they going to stick with the conservatives? And some of this is they're kind of fitting KenPaxton over the Trump template of, he may be a rogue, but he's carried out God's will in the state of Texas, and so we're going to support him because he's, in the words of the evangelist J. Frank Norris at First Baptist Church in Fort Worth, who was the first nationwide broadcast evangelist, J. Frank Norris, and he often was described as God's rascal, and so they view him as another of God's rascals who carries out God's will despite his own failing.
But I thought that was interesting closing yesterday that the House managers used the word immoral.
Yes.
That's not a word you typically use in closing argument. So the invocation of God throughout this entire process has been from the beginning all the way to the end, even to Leach talking about how Paxton is his brother in Jesus.
Right.
And so, and that they had gone to church together, they had prayed together, they had traveled together. And so I thought that was very interesting, that it was not only criminal and that they had met beyond reasonable doubt, but Paxton's conduct was immoral.
And of course, Murr talked about that this is a godless, rudderless morality.
Yes,
but
it's a great line.
But the fact of the matter is, the senators, half of them lawyers, would sit there and say, well, morality is not against the law. Immorality, this is not against the law. We're not judging this article impeachment of there's
But you
nothing
don't have
in
to
here
prove a
saying
violation of the law.
you don't have to prove a violation of the law, but there's nothing in here that says he was immoral. I mean, the
Right.
threshold for upholding article of impeachment, do you look for delinquencies or maladministration? Those are the two things the Supreme Court has said constitute a article of impeachment. Certainly the argument about morality appeals to the Senate, but this is where you have the split in the Republican Party over whether you overlook the morality for the greater success of conservatives, or whether you are appalled at the morality as poor Christian witness.
Right, and that's playing really on a national scale too, not just here, but that there was sort of who could be the bigger Christian in the room, I think, has always been on display throughout this process.
The judge is definitely he's
son of a Baptist preacher, right?
Baptist.
And right now, evangelicals, there's a lot of folks
Author
within
of
the
religious book.
Baptist convention who are withdrawing because they have felt that this support of Trump, just like Paxton has his Laura Olson issue, Trump had his Stormy Daniels issue, and so there is this theme of morality that it's not just because you remember the line of I'm a law and order guy. I loved that coming back. That Murr brought the line up about we say as Republicans that we back the blue, but yet when Ranger Maxwell didn't give Paxton the answer he wanted, that he would go and get the federal grand jury or probable cause affidavit and disclose it to Nate Paul, that they threw him, they kicked him like garbage to the curb.
And how did Cogdill describe him? Something about a milk carton?
His milk carton has expired. His milk carton has expired.
Well, speaking of
This is the
that,
kind of things they said about a Texas Ranger. I mean, the things they said about
speaking of
law
there's
enforcement.
Dan Coggle right there, and there's Angela Paxton right
Paxton's
there.
arrived.
So what we're seeing there's
Senator Paxton, former Mansfield Tiger.
and there's Senator Royce West. So we're starting to see senators gathering in the chamber. We can see, let's see, there's Dick DeGuerin. Behind him is Andrew Murr. No, it's not Andrew Murr. That's Mark Donnelly. Mark Donnelly, one of the House impeachment managers, he did some of the questioning of some of the witnesses. And so what we're hearing is that we've been told, okay, there's Rusty Hardin. We've been told that at 10:30, these senators will gather and the voting will begin. They will go through each of the 16 impeachment articles. We believe it's going to be done much the same as they did the motions at the beginning of the trial, where each senator votes in writing, and then they poll them randomly to say their votes aloud. And you think about that, that's going to be truly historic. Each of these senators standing up and saying yay or nay 16 times. And then depending on how this turns out, we would go to, if they vote to sustain on one or more articles, then we would go to a vote to determine whether or not to bar KenPaxton from elective state office. Now, if he were to be sustained on any of these and barred, then he cannot be barred from federal office. So, I mean, that's a factor out there. So, but that's kind of where we stand. We see everybody starting to gather, and we're going to know soon how this is going to turn out. I want to ask Matt. Matt, how closely do you think the FBI, because from what we understand, there's a federal grand jury going on. How closely are they paying attention to this trial?
A lot. And if we learned anything from the January 6 hearings that Congress put together, that basically was the roadmap that the Department of Justice used, the FBI, as well as when they appointed Jack Smith as special prosecutor. And I think there'll be a roadmap here as well from what the House managers have done here. What I would have liked, I will tell you, the one thing I think where they made a mistake, the House managers, is I wouldn't have had Rusty Hardin and Dick DeGuerin presenting my case in chief. I would have either had House managers do it or pick former federal prosecutors.
Like Eppley.
Yeah,
Aaron Eppley,
like Aaron Eppley.
Extremely
I think
effective.
you're an Aaron Eppley fan.